want to let everybody know.
Can you hear me, Fred?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. How's everybody this evening?
Hi, Marilyn. I'm good.
We hear you loud and clear.
Hello there,
Stephen.
Mary.
Thank
How you
you.
doing?
I'm great, thank you.
Good.
everybody.
Nice seeing you.
Yeah, nice seeing all of you.
Would have been better the other way.
It's not as good as in person, but at least we're all safe, right?
Maybe.
You got that right.
I'd have been
And that's
better
We
off in
can
the
all
board.
love each other at a distance. So,
There you go.
You have to stay safe. Whew.
yes.
I'd have been better off in the boardroom.
Yes, sir. I agree 100%.
Well, maybe we'll put both of you in the boardroom and we'll just stay away from it.
Sounds good to me.
Good.
You bring
I'm
the deck-
okay with that.
You bring the deck of cards, Aaron.
Okay.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. There are no agenda changes, and with that, I will turn it over to the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gurl,
Present.
Mrs. Gorel, Mrs. Gorel,
I'm present.
thank you. Mr. Hoffman,
Present.
Mr. Kelly,
Here.
Mr. McDonald,
Here.
Mr. Neighbors,
Here.
I'm here, but I can't, no sound.
Mr. Red, I'm sorry, Mrs. Red,
Present.
thank you. Mr. Salgado,
Present.
Mr. Schultz,
Here.
Mr. Tassoni,
Present.
Mr. Webster, he's still not on yet?
No, he's not.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Westcott,
Present.
Mr. Zintak. I can see that he's on the toolbar, but I don't know if Mike can hear us. Because he's not.
He said earlier he couldn't hear before we started.
Okay,
Excuse me, Clerk Gummo.
yes.
I think there's something, I maybe clicked it off. I think he was on screen sharing, but I think he's off now.
Okay, I will put Mr. Zintak as absent until he comes
I'm
back.
here, but I can't hear you.
Okay. Mr. Arena,
Here.
Mr. Billich,
Here.
Mr. Booker,
Here.
Hello?
Mr. Butita,
Here.
Mrs. Crosby,
Here.
Mr. Fellers,
Here.
Mr. Fiducia.
I am here.
Okay, and just let me confirm, so the only one that is absent currently is Mr. Webster. So, Mr. Chairman, that would be 19 present and 1 absent.
He can't get on.
Okay, thank you very much, Clerk Gummo. With that, I will ask everybody to stay seated, but I will turn things over to Mr.
I can't
Westcott.
hear you.
You cannot hear me speaking right now.
I can.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay. So,
I
Mr.
can't hear
Zintak-
anything right now.
Mr. Zintek, I understand you're the only one.
I
who
see
cannot-
you, but I can't hear you.
Understood. So we're going to move on, and I'll ask a member of the IT department to call Mr. Zintek. For whatever reason, he's having a hard time here. And with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Westcott for the invocation and pledge.
Thank you, Chairman. Tonight, I want to thank the Lord for everything that he's done for us on this COVID stuff. and that we need to get together as a group of people rather than these silly Zoom meetings and do our business as we should. And with that, I want to praise all of our military, our law enforcement,
Where is that? The mute button.
our sheriff department, and everyone else who,
Oh, okay, hold on, I see it.
everyone else that's involved with EMTs and our public safety.
Yeah, I do.
Amen.
Yeah, it's got an X on it.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. With that, we'll join Mr. Westcott in the pledge.
Hello?
I pledge
I still
allegiance
can't hear anybody here.
To the flag
of the
of the
United
United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for
Okay, I've
all.
done that twice already.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me,
You all sound good.
Okay, we'll ask everybody to go ahead and mute their computers unless they have the floor.
If could the person on the IT squad who's overseeing this mute Mr. Zintak? He can't hear us, so he doesn't know that he's not muted.
Is somebody speaking? Okay, have Gus tell him to mute his computer. With that, I will move on to board member correspondence. Any board member correspondence? Yes, Mr. Butita.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank yourself and Steve Chapman and whoever else was responsible for moving tonight's meeting to Zoom. I know many of us would like to resume our normal meetings where we get to interact with each other, and I'm looking forward to that day also. But obviously, these are not normal times. So, and I know myself personally, you know, and maybe some of us, you know, we think we're bulletproof health-wise, but some of us, and probably most of us, have family or close friends that we either are required to interact with or desire to. And so the ability to continue these type of meetings so that we can protect other individuals, I think is beneficial. So I'm appreciative of the Zoom format, and I look forward to the day that we can obviously end them. But if going forward, if we can, as was suggested today, I guess that if we have an option to do Zoom or be in the boardroom, for us that have some issues that we would like to keep family or friends safe, I would appreciate if we could, excuse me.
Thank you very much.
And, you know, until all members are satisfied that we can meet safely. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Petita. At our next meeting, we will have the ability to be in person and also have the ability, if you choose, to be remote. So I apologize, there was a glitch that we need to have worked out, and we'll be ready to do that at our next board meeting. Thank you, Mr. Petita. Mr. Billick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I didn't hear that for a second. I just wanted to say to the rest of the board, thank you guys for everyone who's putting in the hard work. We do appreciate you guys, and the public appreciates you very much so. And I did want to tell you guys, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. But I do want to remind a lot of, getting feedback here. Apologize for the feedback. I do appreciate what everyone's doing. I do want to remind the board members, one of the biggest things that a lot of people are looking at us right now for is making sure that we're keeping on task with what we got elected for, which is serving the community, and making sure that it's not going to be a focus on the political realm of things. I've seen a lot of posts. I've had a lot of attacks myself, and I stay away from doing any posts that can actually put us in that potential classification of making it just a political game, when in reality we're actually dealing with different times, as Mr. Butita said. So I do appreciate everybody and everyone's efforts. I just want to remind everyone to stay focused on that task because the community appreciates what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Billick. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll move on to Chairman's report. The couple things, I was very happy to see the outcome of the hearing around Chief O'Shea today. I think that was the most appropriate outcome for when you looked at all of the facts, and I appreciated that process playing out in the manner in which it did. Back a few days ago, I dropped an email to, I believe, the board, but in particular to Mr. Billick and to others related to the recent discussion. We are coming to the end of our 5-year agreement with the RAEDC at $100,000 a year. Recently, they announced unification with the chamber in the creation of an umbrella organization. So basically, there'll be 2 boards going forward and the creation of a 3rd board over the top of it. I would just say the end of this 5-year run with a host fee commitment of $100,000 a year before we proceed into a 6-year or another 5-year commitment, maybe there is an opportunity to look at economic development interests in our region, and are we best situated with that investment, or do we take those dollars and invest it in economic development at the staff level or in a different manner? Before you push the trigger on whatever future endeavor you make, I would just say it's a great time of opportunity to review as this 5-year commitment comes to an end. So I hope there is thorough discussion around that, around the ROI of it. So that way, if in fact the board decides to re-up for another 5 years at that level, at least it is vetted before we push the button on that. Secondly, and finally, there is before the board this evening 4 appointments and the related materials around these 4 highly qualified, high character individuals that are being appointed subject board approval to the 4 boards. Certainly, I would just say this about the 4 individuals. Cesar Sanchez being appointed to the Community Action Agency. He is an exceptional young leader, works at Midland State Banks, is certainly an up-and-coming leader in our community who's very invested in our community. Rhonda Greer Robinson, appointment to the Housing Authority. Rhonda is the president of the NAACP and an educator for the last 20 or 25 years. Very passionate about increasing access in our community and increasing educational outcomes for all. When Reverend Peter Frank Williams for the Crime Commission. Reverend Williams is part of the Ministers Fellowship member and part of the leadership of St. Luke's Baptist Church. Before that, served on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee in Freeport, and very accomplished. He's both a reverend and a doctor. Him serving on the Crime Commission, I do believe at the end of the day will help us connect the community to our public safety apparatus at the county in a more meaningful way. Lastly, certainly not least, Paulina Siakam, who works at PNC Bank, has a great personal story, but is a highly accomplished financial person in our community. Served on a number of boards, including currently Goodwill Industries, and before that, the YWCA. All of these people, if you look at the merits of their, if you look at their merits, their qualifications, their professionalism, their experience, and their character, I think these are 4 of the absolute best people we've ever put before the board for consideration. As has been the case over the last 3.5 years, appointments tend to fall around a couple of important categories. 1 is the need of the respective entity. 2 is the qualifications of the individual. 3 is the community's continued call to get new people involved in community leadership. And I think those are all 3 important things that work simultaneously. Obviously, with a number of discussions going on in our country, in our community, and even recently in Winnebago County government on the county board, as has been asked, is to look at getting new faces involved, diverse faces involved, new perspectives involved, and that's what we've done in these appointments. So that is what is brought in tonight for first reading. And I wanted to make sure I spent a minute on that under Chairman's remarks. So thank you very much for that opportunity. With that, I will move on to announcements and communications, and I'll turn it over to Clerk Gummow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we'll place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk Gummow.
Thank you.
Consent agenda. We have 3 items this evening: the raffle report, the approval of the June 11th minutes, and the layover of the June 25th minutes. May I please have a motion on the consent agenda, please? Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. May I have a second? Thank you, Mrs. Crosby. The consent agenda and the 3 items on it are before the board for discussion. Any discussion or comments by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing and hearing no objection, I will ask Clerk Gummow to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Next item of business, County Administrator's report. Steve?
I have no report tonight, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any department head updates this evening? I do want to note, I see Mr. Webster is joining the meeting. Mr. Webster, thank you. And we'll ask Clerk Gummow, and I get the thumbs up from her to note that as well. Any comments by department heads this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to standing committee reports. Finance Committee, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 2 items tonight before the county board. The first item is a resolution affixing compensation and other benefits for the clerk of the circuit court, and I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. Salgado on the resolution fixing compensation and other benefits for the clerk of the circuit court. May I have a second, please? Second, Mr. Girl, Mr. Arena. Item is now before the board for question and discussion. Any board member question and discussion? Do you mind just giving a quick 30-second overview of that, Mr. Salgado or Steve?
Yeah, so Mr. Chapman, I don't have the numbers on me, but it's similar with the auditor aspect of it from the Supreme Court. I believe they came out with those numbers, and so essentially I don't have the dollar value. So Mr. Chapman, if you want to chime in, the first 2 years there's no increase, and then the third and the fourth year there's a 3% living a wage increase on that. So, but Mr. Chapman, I don't know if you have the dollar figure.
Yeah, actually, the first year the salary I believe goes up $4,000, and that particular amount is the same for the following year. The third year, I believe it's the inflation factor, similar to what we did with the other elected officials, and the fourth year inflation factor also. So it's similar to what we did with the coroner and the auditor.
Thank you very much. Any questions by board members? Yes, sir, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just make sure I understood correctly, this increase in this upcoming year is mandated at the state level? These salaries are set by the state?
Go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
No, they're not set by the state. They're the salary set by the county board for this particular position.
Okay, and so we're still within the window to do it for this election cycle?
Yeah, the circuit clerk is actually an employee of the state, so they're not under the same statutes that the other elected officials are. The compensation can be changed at any time, so we just normally do it after we've set the other salaries.
And just for the fact that these monies are coming from their operations revenue that comes in to suffice that increase that Mr. Chapman alluded to.
Good point.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members opposed to this motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is Budget Amendment 2020-001, 019 circuit clerk to be laid over, but I would like to move and suspend the rules.
So we've read this in, and there's now a motion by Mr. Salgado to suspend. May I have a second on the motion to suspend? Thank you, Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Girl. Motion and a second to suspend is before the board. Any discussion before we take the vote on suspending the rules? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to suspending the rules? Seeing none, we will cast a yes vote for all members present. We've now suspended the rules. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to approve Budget Amendment 2020-019 circuit clerk, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on Budget Amendment 2020-019 circuit clerk. A second, please. Mr. Girl, thank you again, Mr. Hoffman. We have a motion, a second on the budget amendment. Any discussion or questions by board members? We
Mr. Chairman,
from Mr. Salgado or Steve.
Yeah, so essentially this is a net effect of, it doesn't increase anything. It's just a allocation piece from one item to the other. I don't have, once again, the dollar amount. Mr. Chapman, do you have that dollar amount?
Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The dollar amount is $18,000. It was paid out of one fund that's under the control of the circuit clerk, and he wanted the dollars to be paid out of another fund. So we're just moving the money between the two funds.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing and hearing no objection, I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado.
And Mr. Chairman, that concludes our report for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Zoning has no report.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Economic Development Committee, Mr. Billick. Mr. Billick.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no report tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Billick, I do need to reach out to you tomorrow on a phone call related to a $5,000 host fee discussion in the community. I'll give you a call tomorrow.
Thank you.
Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Operations has two resolutions for us this evening. The first resolution to appoint precinct election judges, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald to appoint precinct election judges, a second by Mr. Salgado and Mr. Fellers. Any discussion by board members? Yes, Mr. Kelly.
Good luck recruiting them.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any other discussion by board members? With that, we'll vote. Are there any board members opposed to this motion? Seeing and hearing no objection, I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a resolution awarding roof recover for the Juvenile Detention Center, and I so move.
Motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution awarding the roof recover for the Juvenile Detention Center, second by Mr. Salgado and Mr. Hoffman. Thank you very much. Any discussion or questions by board members? Yes, sir. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to commend Mr. McDonald on the work he's done for that. I believe he has saved the county some money, and I just want to commend him on that. So congratulations, Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Any other discussion or questions by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing none, hearing none, I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald.
That concludes our report. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Just a heads up, I think Steve actually mentioned this in the office today. There's going to be an item related to the trustee program coming to your committee next week related to a couple of properties where there was objection to the highest bidder. Some due diligence was done and the recommendation will be to not go with the highest bidder. So that will be coming to committee per the agreement with R1 and based on all of the protocol that way. So that'll be something that'll be coming your way here when Steve gets the paperwork ready.
Thank you. I look forward to that discussion.
Thank you, sir. Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Public Works Committee brings forth one ordinance this evening. Item 20-023. It's an ordinance prohibiting parking on Old River Road between Carlson Court and Wake Forest Parkway on Old River Road, and I so move.
Yes, motion by Mr. Tassoni on the ordinance prohibiting parking on Old River Road between Carlson Court and Wake Forest Parkway. That was already laid over one time. Second by Mr. Kelly and Mr. Girl. Thank you, Mr. Girl. Item is now before the board for discussion or question. Mr. Tassoni, want to speak to this?
Yes, and like I say, this was just brought forward to us by the Rockland Police Department, and basically it's to help congestion on the roadway when they have events on the school grounds.
Gotcha. Any other discussion or questions by board members on this request by the city police? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Seeing and hearing no objection, we're going to ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes our Public Works report.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Next item of business, Personnel Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one resolution to bring in tonight. Actually, I'm going to read the whole resolution because I think it's quite important. The resolution is recommended making a conditional offer of employment to a candidate for the Winnebago County Administrator. Whereas the County Board Personnel and Policies Committee Ad Hoc Committee has interviewed candidates for the Winnebago County Administrator, and whereas the Personnel and Policies and Ad Hoc Committee has made a recommendation to the Personnel and Policies Committee that a conditional offer of employment for Winnebago County Administrator be made to a Patrick Thomas, and whereas the County of Winnebago wishes to make conditional offer of employment to Patrick Thomas for Winnebago County Administrator. Now, therefore, it shall be resolved by the Winnebago County Board of the Winnebago, Illinois, authorizes the conditional offer of employment as Winnebago County Administrator to Patrick Thomas. May it further be resolved that the condition offer of employment be made subject to a satisfactory background check and negotiations of salary and benefits package with Mr. Thomas. This will be further resolved at this time and shall be effective immediately on adoption. I would like to so move this.
Okay. We got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution recommending conditional offer to a candidate for county administrator. A second by Mr. McDonald, Mr. Arena.
Mrs. Red.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster.
Mrs. Red.
And Mrs. Red as well. So we have a motion, a second. I just want to apologize. Mr. Booker, we're coming back to you. I skipped your committee altogether. We're coming right back to you after we take this vote. But the motion and second is on the conditional offer to the county administrator candidate. Any discussion or commentary by board members? Yes, Mr. Arena. Oh, Mr. Fiducia, I'll go to you first and then Mr. Arena. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I would like to thank the ad hoc committee for their timeless work. I know that this was a long time in coming, but there were circumstances that we couldn't foresee happening. And I feel as though we've made a good choice, and hopefully Mr. Chapman is going to negotiate with Mr. Thomas, and we can get this done. But once again, Mr. Arena, thank you so much, and welcome to the Personnel and Policies Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to thank Lorraine Logan and Michael King from Workplace for the work they did in bringing us two very qualified candidates. We had very thorough interviews. I think what set Mr. Thompson apart was his years of experience in county government. I'm very enthusiastic about him and very excited about him joining us. Hopefully we will get that done. I think his background will really allow him to hit the ground running. So I hope all of my fellow board members support this nomination. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arena. Any other discussion or commentary by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members opposed to this motion? Hearing and seeing no objection, we will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. We'll extend that conditional offer to Mr. Thompson. Any other discussion? Or I'm sorry, I'll go back to you, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's going to conclude my report. However, I'm hoping that as soon as Mr. Thompson, either it's a yay or nay, I'm hoping that Mr. Chapman gets with us immediately on this, so that way we know where we're sitting on this. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. I'll go back. Mr. Booker, I apologize. I jumped ahead of you on the schedule there, so we'll go to Public Safety Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. No harm, no foul. The Public Safety Committee brings forward 3 resolutions. All 3 resolutions passed unanimously through Public Safety Committee. The first resolution authorizing the execution of a First Amendment of agreement between Winnebago County, Illinois, and Remedies, Renewing Lives for the Domestic Violence, Enhanced Training and Services to End Abuse in Later Life grant. And I make a motion to approve.
We got a motion by Mr. Booker on authorizing the execution of the First Amendment of agreement between Winnebago County and Remedies for domestic violence, enhanced training and services to end abuse in later in life. Grant, may I have a second to that motion, please?
Second. Dorothy Red.
Second by Mrs. Red, second by Mr. Westcott and Mr. Zintek and Mr. Neighbors. Thank you very much. Item is now before the board for discussion. Any questions or comments by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Okay, seeing and hearing no objection, I will ask Clerk Gumow to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Number 2, a resolution authorizing the execution of a First Amendment of agreement between Winnebago County, Illinois, and Rockford Sexual Assault Counseling for the Domestic Violence Enhanced Training and Services to End Abuse in Later Life grant. And I make a motion to approve.
We got a motion by Mr. Booker on the resolution authorizing the execution of First Amendment of agreement between Winnebago County and Rockford Sexual Assault Counseling for the Domestic Violence Enhanced Training. Second by Mrs. Gorel, second by Mr. Zintak. Thank you. Item is now before the board for discussion. Any questions by board members or comments? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. And the last resolution is authorizing the county board chairman to amend contracts for healthcare services for inmates of the Winnebago County Jail and detainees of the Juvenile Detention Center. And I make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Booker on authorizing the chairman to amend contracts for healthcare services for inmates of the jail and detainees for the Juvenile Detention Center. May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Zintak. Thank you. Item is now before the board for discussion. Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this motion? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to remind everyone, it looks like we'll have a Public Safety Committee meeting next Wednesday to discuss the Harlem Schools contract and the McChesney Park contract.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Booker. Next item of business, I believe we're done with committees. Unfinished business. Any unfinished business by board members? Seeing none. New business. Oh, I'm sorry. Any unfinished business?
Yes, Mr. Haney?
Yes, sir. Mr. Westcott, go ahead.
I want to thank you for the nice discouraging remarks about me during the when you're talking about all the new appointments. And my 20 years of service as the Winnebago County Housing Authority 19 and a half of those as chairman. And for you to say something like, this lady is the most qualified that you've ever seen, or however you said it, is an insult to me. And I think this board should chastise you. And I'm going to ask you right now again for your resignation. Just because you're the way you present yourself anymore, you need to go away. That's all I got to say.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I concur with what Fred said there, and for the life of me, I can't understand why at this point in time, when this man has earned more accolades locally, statewide, and nationally, I don't understand why in the world you would choose to replace him at this time, knowing full well that he wants to stay on. It makes no sense to me. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mr. Westcott. Do you want to stay on the Housing Authority?
Of course I do.
And my time on the board, which has been probably a long time, 12 some years, you've done a yeoman's job on that. And I don't understand what the hubbub is on this right now. I'm certainly not going to support the chairman with this. I could understand if you didn't want to be on it. I could understand if there was some other things going on, but I in my heart, I've got to do what I think is right. And what I've done these last 2 years, I've taken my mind off my election and did stuff that's right. And what I'm doing right now is supporting you is the right thing to do. And I'm going to ask the board members to do the same for you. Thank you.
Let me can you get back on, Dave?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Westcott.
Yes, Dave. I want to thank you for those words, and I want you to know that I really feel like I don't know. Mr. Haney called me a couple of days ago and wanted me to resign, and he was going to do it under fanfare and all this, going to make me look really good. And we know what a blowhard he is, and that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Well, just so you know, Mr. Haney did the same thing to me when I was the chairman of public safety. And at the committee meeting, I warned everybody at that meeting. I said, if he'll do it to me, he'll do it to you. So he's done it to you too, Fred. And that's all I have to say about that. And Mr. Haney, I don't want you to resign. I just want you to grow up.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. So we will move to new business where we have 4 appointments. The 4 appointments are the Community Action Agency Board, Cesar Sanchez, the Winnebago County Housing Authority, Rhonda Greer Robinson, the Winnebago County Crime Commission, Reverend Peter Frank Williams, and the Chicago Rockford International Airport Board, Paulina Siakam. And to respond to the comments, actually, Mr. Westcott is inaccurate in his assertion of what I said the other day. What I said the other day publicly was that I thanked Mr. Westcott for over 20 years of service. The concern I have is multiple. One being that if the mantra or the dictate or the mandate or the law or even the preference of any governing body is that if somebody has a position on an appointed board, that it is a lifetime position or a position that is theirs until death do us part or until any number of other factors, that would be a concern to me because there is an equal pressure, a mounting pressure, a national discussion, and for heaven's sakes, on this board floor just a few weeks ago, a very robust discussion about inclusion and about getting new people involved in community leadership. I heard those calls. They came from members of this very body, very loudly, repeatedly, robustly. So I guess then, when you look at the 4 extremely qualified. And by me saying that somebody is extremely qualified, in no way dismisses good work done by any of the 4 people who held the positions before. That is a false narrative to suggest that something bad is being replaced by something good. No, in fact, you have work that has been done over a period of time, but if not 20 plus years, if these become positions, especially when there is a county board member involved, that become basically lifetime positions, and there are calls in the community by voices on this particular board repeatedly, and community folks repeatedly saying, we need to get new people involved in community leadership. Understand there are multiple conversations going on around that, and there's a lot of that discussion going on nationally and locally and on the county board. So it was a slight bit incorrect in the assertion. I'm sorry if you heard otherwise, Mr. Westcott, but actually I did thank you publicly for your service. And I also said that the person that I'm recommending, Rhonda Greer Robinson, is exceptionally qualified. That is not in any way dismissive to you, sir. That is saying that people, in fact, can stand on their own. And if the board looks, and I think should look at the qualifications of the 4 people, the 4 individuals before them, if you look at the resumes, scratch off the name and just look at the resumes, these are 4 exceptional people. And I was asked by members of this board to take a look at getting diverse perspectives involved. And I did that at the request of board members. In fact, I think we've accelerated that discussion over the last 3.5 years. I was in forecast that we would be doing this here in the near future. I said that as late as just a few weeks ago. So slightly inaccurate comments, but I'm sorry if anybody took that personally. It is not. It is about the idea of what the needs of the community, the organization, the skill set of the individual, and also the community's call to get more people involved. Any other discussion? We have 4 individuals in. Yes, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to say I've been providing housing in this community for 30 years, and I interact frequently with other housing providers in this community for the majority of that time. The Winnebago County Housing Authority has an excellent reputation among people who are in the business on how it's run, and for those who like to do business, with public housing authorities. So I have to commend Mr. Westcott on the work he's done there. And secondly, in response to Chairman Haney's point about the qualifications of the applicants, and speaking of Rhonda Greer Robinson, she does have an impressive resume, but she has no experience in the area of housing related matters. She's a school teacher. So even though her resume is impressive, I don't see how it translates to this position. So I have to respectfully disagree with the assertion that, she might be more qualified to fill this role than Mr. Westcott. And I want to make the other members of this board aware of that fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would just like to speak to like I say, on behalf of Mr. Westcott there. For countless years on the board here, he's brought back awards and grants and various proclamations for all the good deeds that the Winnebago County Housing Authority has done. He's been a big part of that. And in addition to that, I'd like to speak about Mr. Tom Del Sano on the airport board there as well. That airport there is probably one of the top 3 or 4 things in this community that's bringing in tax revenue and keeping a lot of people employed. And I have heard from at least a few people in the community that opposed, the dismissal of Mr. DeSano and Mr. Westcott. I have not heard any negative response from the other 2. And I would just ask that should we take a vote on this in the short term here, that they're separated out and voted on individually. Thank you.
May I make a comment?
Thank you. I have Mr. Hoffman, then I have Mrs. Crosby, then I have Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to go along some of the lines of Mr. Sony and some of the other people. But what I'm going to go back to was when you wanted Mr. Sablowski on the airport board and you fought hard for weeks for him. and you contacted me a number of times. We worked on it. Well, I'm at the same point with Mr. Del Santo that I have heard from a lot of people that they want him to remain on that board as much as you want Mr. Sabaska on that board. I'm looking at you to reflect on that and do what's good for that board, not just put people in. The second thing is, I have not met any of these new people that or heard.
Mr. Hoffman, I apologize, you're blurring out a little bit. Can you take your video down so that we can hear the voice?
So I would like to lay this over, or at least, or maybe even table it for now. We got a new chairman coming in a few months.
So,
I don't know how far I got, but my point is, like I said, there's a lot of people crying out for Mr. Santos. Okay. Well, I'm just going to leave it there since I don't know where you heard me and didn't hear me. So, meanwhile, I think we should either table this or at least put some more time for us to at least meet the people that you're talking about. I haven't met any of them, or heard of any of them. So, I think if we're going to look at people that have been on the board a long time, we're taking them up. I don't know how many people have met these people. So I don't think we should do it at this point. Either lay it over or table it entirely until we get a new chairman in. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman.
If that's a motion to table, I'll second that motion.
We have a motion. We have a motion. I didn't hear a motion. He talked about that. I have Mrs. Crosby next, and then we will definitely get to that, Mr. Webster. Mrs. Crosby.
I just wanted to say, which will probably tick a lot of people off, but that's okay. You know, I support Tissoni's recommendation to separate the votes. I think we can move some of these guys forward and just let the board members vote the way they want to vote on the individuals and then call it a day. I think his recommendation shows a lot of wisdom, and I support that. That concludes my comments.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to agree that we probably do need some new people on these boards, but on the other hand, you're only going to be here for a few more months, and I truly believe that the new chairman, whoever it is taking the chair there, should make those recommendations. I truly would like to make the motion that we table this until we get a new chairman.
I'll second that motion.
So we got a motion and a second to table this item. A motion and a second to table. And so with that, is there any discussion on the motion and a second to table? Yes, Mr. Kelly.
Yes, it's really not necessary to do this. I think the more appropriate way to deal with it is the division of the question that was originally mentioned, dividing the two that are controversial versus the two that might not.
Point of order, there's a motion.
Point of order.
Hold on.
There's a motion.
I think there was a motion to divide the question first.
No, there was never a second on that.
Okay, hold on a second. So Mr. Kelly can speak. There has been no motion at this point to separate.
Angie made a motion to table.
Excuse me, Mr. Webster, you do not have the floor. I do agree with your point. The motion in the second is on tabling. The point that I wanted to clarify is that Mr. Kelly can certainly speak his opinion, since this is about whether or not to table. If he has a different opinion in mind, he can finish his thought. There's no objection I have to him finishing his statement. There has been no motion to split this out. At this point, before we vote on tabling, the item, if we take no action, will lay over. If the board decides to table it, it would be tabled indefinitely. That is separate from anything else. But Mr. Kelly, you can finish your thought on separating out if you choose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please don't table everything. Let's divide the question and deal with what we can deal with and we can lay over the rest or whatever. Lay over or table.
Okay, thank you very much. So the motion before the board is to table the appointments. Did I see another hand up? Mr. Neighbors, there's a motion, a second to table. Before I give the floor to Mr. Neighbors, the only thing I find curious and slightly inconsistent, all due respect, to some of the board members specifically that are talking about not taking action with 5 months to go, is that in the former chairman's final board meeting after the election, that the board approved a slew of appointments to community boards, including one of its own outgoing board members to the highest paid community board in the community. And this is much different. This is not doing something like that. This is 4 or 5 months before the end of a term with work that needs to be done. So I guess since a number of the folks who brought this issue up about timing all voted to make a last minute series of appointments on an outgoing chairman's final board meeting, we got a bunch of work to do the next 4 or 5
Point
months.
of order, there's a motion.
And so I am speaking directly to this idea of whether or not to lay over. And so I just have a hard time reconciling that, but nevertheless, I'll conclude my remarks. Mr. Neighbors. Mr. Neighbors, you have the floor, sir.
I'll wait because I need to speak to it on the other question. I have my question up on the first motion.
The motion to lay over? I'm sorry.
Yeah, my comment isn't about the motion to lay over. It was on the previous motion. So I'll wait till we go back to the previous motion.
Okay, there has been no motion before that. We merely read in the items that will lay over if there is no tabling. But we can come back, whether or not we table this, we can come back to you for your thoughts after we conclude the discussion to table this item or not. Any other discussion by board members? The motion, of course, just to clarify for the board floor, is to table this item. Tabling leaves it on the table indefinitely. There was a motion, a second around that item. The motion would be to table. Any other discussion by board members? A yes vote would table, a no vote would leave it before the board, where if no other action would be taken, it would automatically lay over for 2 weeks as appointments due on their first reading. So a yes vote would table, a no vote leaves it here to just lay over a board meeting. Any other discussion? With that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. And again, a yes vote tables and a no vote leaves it before us. Clerk, come out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Gorel. Mrs. Gorel.
All right, I'm on. Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Oh.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors.
No.
Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Westcott.
Yes.
Mr. Zintak.
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
Yes.
Mr. Billich.
Yes.
Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita. Is Mr. Butita still on the line?
I think Butita left the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Crosby.
No.
Mr. Fellers.
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 16 yes, 3 no, and 1 absent.
Thank you very much. Motion to table passes. Mr. Neighbors, I'll go to you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first like to thank Mr. Westcott for his 20 years of service and his impeccable work with the Winnebago County Housing Authority. A couple weeks ago, we were talking about diversity and how we need to improve our diversified scope. And just like the chairman said, it was not a knock to your years and your quality of work. It was just him trying to prove to the community, and that the Winnebago County Board is trying to prove to the community that we are willing to diversify and willing to improve the things that we can improve upon. He's not saying you did a terrible job by putting someone else in that spot. It's just like we're showing the community that we can evolve and we can change and we can rise above the things that are going now in these trying times. You know, there's still protests going on, and there's still other things going on. And in order to help alleviate some of that pain with the protests going on and the minorities not feeling included, the chairman is making a move, making a push to help minorities get included in some of the boards and some of the decision making in our community that we live in. And I hear all the people that just want to get mad about the politics and get mad about certain personal digs when we need to put our personal digs aside and put the politics aside. You know, we may not like how it all went down, but now's the time to show the community that we stand up for minority inclusion. And all the comments that I heard was a bunch of comments from a bunch of white men with white privilege. When I say that, you don't know what it feels like not to have white privilege. So some of the things that you're saying, you don't know that you have a racist comment and a racist attitude about this whole situation because you're so used to the white privilege that you have. And so it's for you to come at the chairman and attack him for his minority appointments because your feelings got hurt after you've done such a great job in order to keep your job and not let somebody else prove that the minorities can go forward and help this community just as well as you did. That's a dig at the minority community. So for everyone to table this and not let this go through on minor circumstances, I really feel that's a step backwards for the Winnebago County Board, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mrs. Crosby, second by Mr. Hoffman. Any board members opposed to adjourning? We've adjourned the meeting. Thank you very much.